LBC.
Good morning to you, with you here on LBC on this Saturday breakfast show, talking about renting a home. Many people have probably given up all hope now of buying a home because they can't raise a deposit because of the cost of houses has soared so much. But what about renting a home? A think tank, Civitas, says a new regime is needed in the private rental sector to prevent landlords from exploiting the shortage of homes at the expense of both tenants and taxpayers. Well, are you in rented accommodation? Are you being, let's put it bluntly, ripped off by your landlord? Are you a landlord? Are you ripping off your tenants? The rented sector, of course, is going to become ever more important. The growing private rented sector is expected to account for more than 1/3 of Britain's entire housing stock within the next 15 years. At present, 2/5 of private tenants' incomes are taken up by their rent. 2/5 of your money, 40% of your income is going out in rent. So is it time for tougher controls? Should private landlords be told they've got to have actual limits on how much they can increase their rent? Civitas says a new regime is needed in the private sector to prevent landlords exploiting the shortage of homes, both at the expense of tenants and taxpayers. Let's talk now to Alan Ward, who's chairman of the Residential Landlords Association, and Sonia Poulton, who's a journalist and social commentator. Good morning to you both.
Morning, Andrew.
Alan, if I can go to you first, are you the big bad beast who's exploiting hard-working men and women who can barely afford to pay their rent?
Well, I would say no, wouldn't I?
You would?
But no, we're providing much-needed housing, and we're the only sector that's actually able to provide homes at the moment. In the last 26 years, of the 5 million new homes that have come into the market, 3 million have been funded by private sector landlords. But this claim that rents are rising in this Civitas report, they're rising faster than wages, just isn't true. The government's own figures show that average rents across the whole of Britain in the year to September went up by 1%, and average wages in that time was 1.6. Actually, rents in the social sector are rising faster than the private rented sector. They've gone up by 4 or 5% in the last year. So the Civitas report's wrong on that.
What about the idea now that private renters, more and more of them, Alan, are needing to use housing benefit to meet their costs? The cost to the taxpayer in the private sector is increasing exponentially every month.
Well, again, that's another area where the private sector is providing housing that nobody else can. There's not enough building by social housing. Council housing stocks virtually all transferred to social housing providers. So the housing support. I mean, this report can't have it both ways. It says that people who need support for their housing costs should have it, and I don't argue with that whatever, but they can't get the housing that they need from local authorities. So that's where the private sector has stepped in. But to be fair, a couple of years ago, Shelter actually said that the private rented sector has been asked to do a job that it's not designed to do. Because local authorities can now discharge this duty to house the homeless to the private rented sector. And a lot of people in there need just more than housing. Housing associations and council housing departments provide an element of social care within that. And, we are not paid to do that.
What is the average rent that an average family would pay, Alan, in Britain today? Do you know?
£680, I think.
And that would be for what, a two-bedroom house? Or a two-bedroom flat?
That's across all housing types.
£680, and if you're on the minimum if you're on an average income of £27,000,
something like that, yeah,
and you've got 2 children and a partner who maybe is not working, that's a lot of money, isn't it?
It's a fair price in a fair market, and the market determines the rents, not the landlord. When I'm looking to rent one of my properties, I look at the quality of the property, the type of people that will live there, but also the what the market is paying at the moment. I can't get people to come and pay me a rent if they don't think they can afford it.
Well, they can if they get benefits, of course, Alan.
And that's, as I say, it is right that some people have support from the state if if their income doesn't match the rent that is being asked. But the way that is assessed, the report is right here in one aspect. I don't want to get into too much technicality. There's a thing called broad market rental areas, and that is based on an assessment of rents across a geographical area. Now, that excludes homes in the benefits market, but there's a degree of averaging here, which means that you get too big a variety. And a lot of authorities would be critical of that, and I would share that comment, that aspect of the report.
Before I go to Sonia Poulton, can I just ask you, Alan, do you object to the idea of rent controls?
Yes, because it doesn't work. It's well known that if you, in its crudest forms, just by saying rents may not rise, that restricts the ability of landlords to maintain and improve their properties. But what the Labour Party is proposing is, in fact, a sort of indexation of rents, which again would not be a very good idea for tenants, because it means that rents will rise by whatever form of indexation they use. So there's a guaranteed increase. Whereas the reality in the market is that one third of tenancies already last 3 years, and the average rent which tenants are paying after 3 years is 8% below the market rents. So the statistics, again, don't show that that's necessary. OK,
that's Alan Ward. He's chairman of the Residential Landlords Association. You might say he would say that, wouldn't he, about rent controls? Let's talk to Sonia Poulton now, who's a journalist and social commentator. Sonia, morning to you. Happy New Year to you. Alan Ward says he doesn't think rent controls would be helpful to anybody.
Well, unfortunately, such is the joys of technology, I didn't actually hear a single word that Alan said, which is probably just as well, because at 8 o'clock in the morning I would have imagined my temperature would have been off the chart having that sort of discussion. The truth is that we desperately need rent controls, and we have done for decades. Ever since Margaret Thatcher obviously removed the cap on private rentals and sold off the housing stock in the Right to Buy scheme, we have never replenished a seriously depleted social housing stock. And so the position that many people have found themselves in is completely untenable and unsustainable. They're pushed into the private sector, where you quite rightly said, I did manage to hear that 40% of people's income now goes on their rent, whereas obviously when people have mortgages, only 20% of their income goes on that. And we do know that this is a very serious problem in terms of housing benefit, and what you have is this artificially created inflation of properties in certain areas. So I'm in no doubt at all whatsoever that we do need a rental cap, yes.
He said that the average rent in England is about £657. Is that a figure that you're familiar with, Sonia?
Yes, but that's very, very average. When you start to look at London prices, we're talking about another animal altogether. Generally, in Greater London, you get a 2-bedroom property for about £1,500 a month.
Whoa! That's big money.
OK, we're talking... So do you see the substantial leap from the sort of national average to London property prices?
Because I suppose we're talking 650 includes... I'm not disparaging the north of England, but perhaps a place in the northeast of England where the local... the wage is nothing like what you earn in London.
Absolutely, but you see, obviously the problem is that London working prices are no better, really, because what we don't have either is really a living wage to sustain people in these homes. And it is greatly worrying, and I don't know if you did quote the housing benefit figures, because unfortunately I couldn't hear that either.
Yeah, they're up substantially.
Massively. I mean, 10 years ago we were talking, only 1.7 million people obviously was using housing benefit to top up their private rental incomes. Now we're talking 3.9, and we're paying out over £9 billion in housing benefit. So that's obviously going straight into the pockets of private landlords. Now, I don't want to sound as somebody who's hating capitalism. That isn't strictly true, not at all. I believe that everybody deserves to earn a wage. Everybody deserves to make profit from their hard work. And if you put out an investment, and there's lots to be said about private renting, it's not all joy and pleasure. I feel sorry for many landlords that I've interviewed. They've had, a sort of hell on earth with their rentals. But nonetheless, it doesn't negate the fact that people are squeezed in untenable ways, and we need to do something about it. And I do totally support the idea that we need to start capping.
OK, that's Sonia Poulton putting completely the opposite view to our guest from Alan Ward, the chairman of the Residential Landlords Association.